Silverado this morning, Dmitri, unveiled, your legislative proposals for the year. Among them, and perhaps the topmost priority, is getting mandatory cyber incident reporting to the federal government to happen. Talk a little bit about the highlights of these proposals.
Yeah, so we just issued 6 key proposals for Congress and the administration for 2022. The key issues that we think are really important to enact, either through legislation or executive action to drive forward cybersecurity across the nation. As you mentioned, the cyber incident reporting legislation, which almost passed last year. In fact, it is so disappointing that at the last minute, when the agreement was achieved on a bipartisan basis between the Senate and the House on this legislation, they just ran out of time to include in the NDA. But this morning we had an event at Silverado, a virtual event with Representative John Katko from the House Republican side and Representative Yvette Clarke from the Democratic side, who both endorsed the legislation on a bipartisan basis and told us that they are very bullish that they'll find a way to pass it by attaching it to some other piece of legislation, critical legislation that has to pass this year. That legislation is broadly supported across industry and most importantly, the government. There is a bit of controversy about that legislation from the FBI DOJ perspective. In fact, we had Brian Vortman on, who is the Cyber Assistant Director of the FBI this morning, and he made it very clear that the FBI's position is that the legislation should include clear language that while CISA will receive the reports from industry about breaches that are taking place, that information will be immediately shared with the FBI. The FBI would like that codified in law. DHS, and we had Rob Silvers on, who is Undersecretary for Policy at DHS, responded by saying that they're fully supportive of sharing with the FBI, and regardless with what happens in legislation, they're going to ensure that as soon as CISA receives the reports, they'll immediately share that information with the FBI. So hopefully we'll find a compromise on that issue. Because it seems like everyone's supportive of the overarching goal to make sure that the information goes as broadly as possible to agencies within the government. But we do need one central place to collect it. We don't need industry to submit it to 50 different places. CISA is a natural ingest point. So I think we'll see something like that pass. And it's really critical because the federal government needs to know about what breaches are taking place. You look at something like SolarWinds, which happened a year ago. And if Kevin Mandia, the CEO of Mandiant, had not come forward and announced his breach, we may not know even to this day about the implication of that attack. So it's absolutely critical. And then the other key priorities I just briefly want to mention, one is on CISA itself. One of the things that I think is really important is to define Cybersecurity Information Security Agency that was created a few years by Congress within DHS. That, from a name, is the agency that you think is responsible for securing at least the government, if not the nation. And in reality, it just does not have the authorities that it needs to fully execute on that mission. And I think we need to define the vision for what does CISA look like 5-10 years from now. And from Silverado's perspective, it makes total sense for us to make CISA the CISO, if you will, the Chief Information Security Office within the government that is responsible for securing most of the civilian government networks so that we don't have 100 different executive branch agencies trying to do their own thing in cybersecurity with varying results. You have it centralized in one location with the best talent you can find in government, with the best technologies that they can procure, and they are responsible for that mission. Just like in companies today, you don't have cybersecurity teams that are within the marketing department and engineering department and sales department. You have one cybersecurity team that protects the company. We need to start taking that approach within the federal government.